come at this. Uh, we've already had obviously Eileen and Rachel kind of speak, and I come at this kind of more as a creative and educational technologist, um, a little less formal than some of the other folks that are in the schedule lineup. Um, my presentation today is kind of really kind of taking you a bit on that journey of learning through virtual worlds, and hopefully some of the and hopefully some of the things that are useful for others, and on my thoughts on hopefully where we can kind of go with things. Um, so even though I'm presenting, I kind of wanted to start here. In some ways, my journey starts with this man who is the bee up on the stage. When I came in, it starts kind of early in 2005, and then later that year, when this was in Second Life, I met Barry Joseph, who at the time was the director of education and learning at a New York City nonprofit that focused on education called Global Kids. And if you're not familiar with Barry's work, it's fantastic. I encourage you to look at it. He's definitely somebody I think who's always trying to connect the dots on not just the tools that we're using, but what's coming up and how that can be used for learning. So, so he, in starting to collaborate and work with Barry, that really formed a lot of my things as I went on with education. That started off for me in the Teen Grid. In Second Life, and from there, and that's a shot from within there. It was a very interesting place to develop for and work within. Um, it's similar to, I guess, in a lot of ways, a lockdown region in, say, Open Simulator or something. It was a separate grid that was running in tandem with, but not directly connected to Second Life's main grid. So it had its affordances and challenges, but in essence, it was an all-youth ecosystem that when you came in to educate or came in as an organization or an educator, you were coming into youth space as opposed to, so, and through, through there, Global Kids and the work that I did with them, we did lots of projects that were focused around often like serious issues and civic learning. So some of the shots from on that slide, some of the projects we did and this was a lot of it. Was directed by the youth, what we focused in on. So there was a lot of problem-based and also game-based learning techniques that were happening, where the students would go through these processes to figure out, okay, what topics are we covering, and then use the virtual environment to fabricate them out in the upper right there. That's a shot from Consent, which is a game that was created about kind of the prison industrial complex and the injustice that happened with decades ago, with many prisoners being medically experimented on without being able to actually legally give consent, because that was taken away from them in prison. And then on the lower right is a representation of part of a crystal knocked Holocaust simulation and learning environment. So often the things that they were focusing were certainly using these environments to often tackle tough topics, but using things like machinima and creating games to kind of convey those seriousness and and using them as the learning tools themselves in those mediums. So some of the other things, obviously, if folks remember back, ResEd was another thing that we produced, which was a hub for educators at the time, speaking back to some of those earlier days of Second Life, as was mentioned. And it also covered other virtual environments. At the time, there was some early days of Open Simulator. A lot of folks were talking about other games like Minecraft and such like that too. And that work continued on. Global Kids um, was working at least within Second Life till at least probably about 2010, 2011. They eventually, the Teen Grid closed down, but before they did, there were spaces in the main grid and Teen Grid, but then eventually everything moved over to the main grid. A lot of as I said, it was a lot of serious issue stuff. One part of it was using the virtual environments to kind of teach about digital democracy and civic engagement. This particular shot here is within the main within Second Life, and that's Kofi Annan. What we did a lot of kind of mixed reality simulcast, multiple audiences, and trying to get them to have conversations and learn together. And this Kofi Annan event was probably the best example of that, where we actually had audiences in Yville, There.com, Teen Second Life, and Second Life all conversing together. Unfortunately, this is in 2008, so early 2008, so Open Simulator wasn't as an option in that. I'm sure we would have put that in the mix too had it been had we had space there then. But there were interesting ways to kind of to have conversations start and to get sort of these conversations to kind of pollinate between them, and again with this vein towards thinking about civic engagement and really digital citizenry throughout all of these platforms. And of course, this transcends into the now too. We're thinking about that for Open Simulator. There were, again, many other events. This philanthropy in virtual worlds was actually something for many years that the MacArthur Foundation funded, along with a digital literacy and media focus. And the person sitting on the right there in the black suit is Jonathan Fanton, the once director, now retired for several years, director of the MacArthur Foundation. We were really using the environments, and this is taken in the main grid. So this is an adult event, and we were really using these spaces to try to further those engagements, and get not only sort of teach about these topics, but then also get folks to as I said, to have conversations and to kind of bring that stuff all back and synthesize it down and share it out again too. Moving on, so the Global Kids work, as I said, it kind of lasted, and I should say there were other pieces of the Global Kids work too, which some of it kind of comes back in the Open Simulator stuff during that period of time. There was a full Second Life curriculum that we produced, of which we made sure to Creative Commons release. And then over the years, besides trickling out into many different forms for those that were interested in Second Life, that also got repurposed and re-edited for Open Simulator. Some of that is released on the AvaCon site. We have a PDF of it. We've also been breaking down some of it into resources and releasing them as video modules and things for others too. And I think that speaks back to sort of what some of Eileen was talking about, the power of kind of, in that case, Creative Commons, but opening up your technology, and not just your technology, but also your findings and your learning, to share that, and where people can sort of work on top of what you're doing as well. So so my journey after the Global Kids thing, and sort of transitioned into nonprofit commons, and I had it had been around in Second Life basically it's a community of practice for social good, and so many nonprofits and educators, librarians, folks who are just interested in causes of various sorts. Um, they started meeting in 2006. Initially, this was an initiative out of TechSoup, which is a San Francisco nonprofit that, if anybody's done any work with nonprofits, they're kind of the resource you would go to get your discounted software and resources for technology and how to deploy it in a nonprofit ecosystem. So they've been running these community of practice things, events and meetings on a weekly basis, and that was something that I had been attending. And through the years, there had been collaborations with Nonprofit Commons and Global Kids and other folks like that. So there was a lot of crossover. And as folks know, even regardless of the medium or the space, there's a lot of crossover, I think, for those of us who do work in this space. So in 2012, I sort of took over the helm as being the community manager of Nonprofit Commons, and rather than also just convening and leading and having informal discussions, I really, all the work that I had done with Global Kids in sort of digital learning, I wanted to really apply that in the social good space. So beyond just being a place for nonprofits to network together, I really wanted that peer learning to be key. That would be a way to kind of further the community. Often a lot of the folks that are there, especially if they're nonprofits, they don't have a lot of resources if they're a smaller nonprofit. So it would strengthen them for us to be able to group learn, and those like myself and folks like Lear, Cynthia, who's in the audience, and others who are part of the community as well, who are much more technically savvy. It allowed us to sort of take these skills, bring them back to the community, and educate them along with us, and so we all kind of bring each other forward. So I took a lot of that learn thing and brought it from there, and that really worked into, and this is another Nonprofit Commons community member who is at the helm, Zinnia Zauber. Who's Renee, Renee, who's part of the Nonprofit Commons. She's an educator and she, besides incorporating the virtual environments to her thing, she's also bringing her students in to both to Nonprofit Commons and then also into the space as well. So we try to also incorporate those who, like Zinnia, who had students to bring them into the space as well. So that kind of peer learning trickled even into another level down into folks who were bringing in their students or bringing in their nonprofit community members or their board or their other members. Yes, definitely, Lear. And I wanted to kind of touch on a few things in some ways going beyond the Nonprofit Commons, but thinking about sort of some of these learning things that were brought up. Some of the projects over time that I've worked with too, I think, are some good examples of some of the learning things that have been spoken about before. So this is a particular thing with the American Museum of Natural History, and I think it's a really good example. Prototyping has been brought up. It was part of in essence, a 2-week kind of summer camp for youth that were part of the museum. And in this case, the virtual prototyping still is done in Second Life, but some of this has been exported out into Kitely. And this is work that I've done with Jeroen Franz, who's Franz Charming, as many know, as part of the stuff that we've done some outside work with directly with educational folks. And in this case, you kind of see how the students they would go out into the environment within the museum as sort of these citizen scientists, and and learn about, in this case, they were learning about Cretaceous sea creatures, and they would go out and they would go into the museum, learn about them, do research on them, and then they were coming into the virtual environment, and then we're using that as a prototyping space. We created, in essence, what became a two-part system for them. Well, they would come in an orientated fashion as quickly as possible. So you'll see sort of in that upper right of the main picture, there's a bit of an orientation that's in the back. But what everybody's standing in front of is sort of the first main part of them work, of the prototyping part of it. They had a Lego kit almost for Cretaceous sea creature parts. So they could, it was a way to quickly, and again, this is implementable in Second Life or an open simulator, but it was a quick way for students to work up to building, because sometimes building can obviously be a learning curve in either Second Life or open simulator. And so they could res out the pieces, pick parts. We programmed it such that there was ways to quickly auto-align things, change textures, change colors, and they could pick, this from a series of the different tails and heads and bodies and fins and all sorts of things like that to kind of make what their prototype Cretaceous sea creature, based off of the research that they did in the actual museum and their drawings and sketches and things. And so they would work at this prototyping space, and then they would head over to where the sea was, which I don't have an image of that, but they would head over to where the sea was, and they would, once they had saved out their build, they would head over to the sea, and the saving it in this case would just be clicking a button, and it would save it into the script, all the configurations and the colors and the textures, and they'd walk over to the sea, click a sign, and it would res their fish for them. They would answer a few more questions, what kind of behavioral things that they wanted to add to their fish, if they wanted to swim in the shallows, swim in the depths, what kind of things they wanted to eat, things like that, how aggressive the fish was or not. And then they would be able to click on the fish, release it into the environment, and all beyond what it was scripted to do, all the other NPC fish, basically, the other fish also had their own scripting in play to be able to either interact or avoid, or and also, so it was in essence creating a full fish simulation that then the students could kind of keep working through, prototyping and reiterating on their fish design, go back to the drawing board, change the pieces, and re-release it, and kind of keep iterating in a really a science-driven way. So, and then, so this was one example, especially I think a good example of the prototyping. I won't go into this much because I'm kind of coming in for time. We've been taking a lot of the education and training things and the resources, as I said, like the curriculum that initially was that Second Life's curriculum, and bringing it into Open Simulator. This is an image from students from Arizona State University. There's a CompuPower program where they had space on the AvaCon grid, and they were using it for educational purposes. And so we were using and basically testing out all the curriculum to sort of not only on board, but then also to kind of quickly get the students in to interact with that. And that furthered as well that that whole curriculum turned into this game-based way of learning to build in Open Simulator. So right here in the AvaCon grid, there's a region called Primland. You can look it up in the map. And in essence, this is a 3D walkthrough homage to Candyland that walks through building skills. And this is, again, I mean, trying to keep to the strengths of something like Open Simulator, and in a way that that this is something that we're actually going to be giving away as a resource, but which then can be easily deployable and to anybody's grid, which sort of goes back to that speaking about the power of open source. The other part to this, and through kind of my journey, is that concept of community. And initially, as Kay said, it started off with AvaCon picking up the ball and organizing the Second Life Community Convention, and these images are from that. And they were physical conferences, though we also did have an online component. And it was trying to figure out, as you know, Kay was alluding to, like, how can we connect folks in these spaces that we're all doing work in here, and some of us are using multiple platforms. And so that's how that sort of started. And for the Second Life ones, it was really kind of connecting Second Life and Open and the users, so the Linden Lab and the users. And then that really set the stage for what we would do for the next part of it, where we really decided to kind of push more into Open Simulator. I mean, first off, it went more with AvaCon's kind of ethos of having a much more open ecosystem that the metaverse should work within. And Krista Lopes, who's part of the speakers today, we reached out to the core folks and worked with them closely to try to get that, so that way there was this ability for the community to be able to connect with the developers, folks to share their best practices and use cases, whether it be in a formal way or whether it be in a more the social and community and 3D and building related parts of what was going on in Open Simulator. And of course, next week, December 8th and 9th, is when we have the next one. So that's been an important part of the journey as well. I won't get into this too much, but in some ways this brings me back to Barry, which that's the real life version of the bee that you saw at the beginning. And there's a great post, a presentation he did actually at the SLCC, where he talks about the tipping point kind of virtual worlds and how they're and how on a kind of public level, how that is sort of how the future of things is kind of evolving, where we are sort of selling the idea of what we're doing in an immersive space. We're needing to sell it a little less, though, and I'll kind of leave it there. Philippe Tuque, who was was a co-founder with me too of AvaCon, has a great article on that, and that'll be shared in the notes afterwards, but it's right up there on the screen. And then just a quick so the where are we going? I mean, obviously we brought up the whole interconnected of devices and the 360 VR heads displays of devices. As was mentioned, there was a VR and still is usable VR way to experience Open Simulator. So that's a possibility. Of course, yes, it does take the better your bandwidth for the frame rate and the better the computer, because it isn't quite, at least the viewers that we have right now aren't quite optimized to that. But that is certainly something that crafting a different viewer that would be native to a 360 format would allow Open Simulator to do. And then the other thing I was just bringing up too is obviously a lot of folks too have been looking at high fidelity, and this is another slide of some work that I did with Dr. Lori Landay out of Berklee College of Music, and their explorations into using places like high fidelity in an educational and interactive setting. So that's it for me.